afternoon, and welcome to our FAFSA Simplification webinar. I know there's still people who are still joining us right now, but we want to get started, so we have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of our presentation. Again, this has been a fun season to learn about all these FAFSA changes ahead and helping students figure out, how do I fill out the FAFSA and what do these big changes mean for me? I'm Aaron Geist, the Associate Director of Financial Aid here at George Fox University, and I'm also joined today by Brennan Rains, who will be presenting, as well as Johanna Kay, Ho Pren, and Lynn Riffenberg, who will be answering your questions in the Q&A section throughout our presentation. So we're glad you're here. This is something we get excited about talking about. I know not everyone does, so that makes us kind of fun but weird people. But we are looking forward to helping you out so that way you know how to pay for college next year and see what changes are ahead for you and how to deal with those changes. One of the things I want to point out is we have a wide variety of audience members here today. We have a lot of continuing George Fox students and their parents who have been through the FAFSA process and are wanting to learn, how does this change you for me next year? We also have a handful of incoming students and their parents who are joining to figure out, how does this new FAFSA process look for us? So when we talk today about you, unless we mention otherwise, we're talking about you, the student, and parents, you'll listen in and enjoy that conversation. All right, so what are the goals today? Before we actually talk about that, I want to talk about a couple session notes here. First of all, we strongly advise you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions throughout the whole presentation, as well as some specific Q&A breaks that we're going to take after each section. We are recording this webinar. You'll have a chance to rewatch it next week if you would like to. And at the end of today's presentation, we are going to share a link to these slides. That way you don't have to write down the links you see. You don't have to take detailed notes on everything. So the goals of our time today, we really want to help you understand, what is FAFSA simplification? And we want to help you understand the changes to the FAFSA form itself, as well as the changes to how they calculate your financial aid eligibility. And then finally, as a student, what should you do now? Because spoiler alert, the FAFSA is not open yet. Well, what is the FAFSA simplification? It's an initiative by the Department of Education to make applying for financial aid for students a lot easier. It's a huge redesign of the FAFSA form and the entire back-end process. In fact, the biggest redesign in over 40 years. But we mentioned on the first slide, because it's complicated, it took 3 different legislative acts of Congress to get everything in order to have this FAFSA simplification go through. So we're here to help really simplify that complexity for you. Again, this is going to make significant changes to the FAFSA form itself and changes to the way your financial aid eligibility is calculated. On the whole, though, it's a really big benefit for students and families. One thing you'll see is it's a more streamlined application process. Sometimes people had to answer 100 questions in the past, and now someone might only answer 36. So it's much easier. There's also an expanded eligibility for federal student aid. So we've noticed that in all of our simulations and estimations, the average family will see increased student aid. And also there's expanded eligibility for the federal Pell Grant. So there should be more families receiving Pell Grant, and those who are receiving Pell Grant will likely see higher amounts. There's generally a better user experience to the form. As we've gone through the prototype ourselves, we can see how it's much more user-friendly. And then finally, they've enhanced the data sharing with the IRS. This is one of the reasons why you have so many less questions to answer, because they've really enhanced that process and made it usable. So with that, I'm going to invite Brennan Rains to join us, and he is going to take us through the changes to the FAFSA form itself.
Thank you, Aaron. As Aaron kind of talked about already, the FAFSA is delayed. So normally it opens up on October 1st. However, this year it is delayed until sometime in December. We don't have a firm date on that just yet. By law, they have to release the new FAFSA by January 1st. So we are going to encourage all students to keep an eye on your email and text messages during the break. Christmas break in particular, because once it opens, we will send out emails and text messages to let you know that it's open and available for this coming year. The first big change is really just the name. So EFC, which stands for Expected Family Contribution, is getting changed to SAI, or Student Aid Index. Now, this number, or it's basically the same thing as it always has been. They're just changing the name to actually reflect what it has always been, which is an index number to help schools calculate your financial and federal need. For incoming students, this is going to help determine what kind of institutional need-based aid you'll be available for. And this year, you may actually see a negative SAI. So it can go as low as negative 1,500. But this does not mean that there's going to be additional need-based aid. It's just helping schools determine more need-based, or who the students, which students are more needy, and possibly have more institutional aid later on down the road. The other big change to the FAFSA is what you're going to hear as contributors. So it's role-based completion. So anybody that's going to be asked to provide information on the FAFSA. So this could be the student spouse, if you're married, parents, step parents, anybody that's going to be asked to provide information will be considered a contributor. And all these contributors are going to need an FSA ID. So this is a brand new thing. It it might mean one parent needs the FSA ID. It might mean two. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But the contributors are going to be determined based on the student and or parent marital status, as well as tax filing status. And then there's a brand new process this year for parents and spouses that don't have a social security number. You will still need to get an FSA ID. The next big change, it has to do with custodial parents. So if your biological parents are separated or divorced, in the past, it was whatever parent that you lived with more during the past 12 months. That is changing this year to whichever parent provided the more financial support. This may result in a change from last year, because you may have not lived with the parent that provided the most financial support, but now you have to report that parent on the FAFSA. The next slide you're going to see here in just a second is kind of which parent needs an FSA ID. So as I had said earlier, the FAFSA is going to be looking at your parent marital status and tax filing status to determine which parent needs to create an FSA ID or FSA ID and provide consent or be a contributor on the FAFSA. Like Aaron said, these slides are going to be shared with you, but kind of an example. So if your parents are married to each other and they filed their taxes jointly in 2022, only one of these parents will need to go on, create an FSA ID, and provide information on the FAFSA. If your parents are married and they didn't file jointly in 2022, maybe they filed married, filing separate, both parents will need to create an FSA ID and log in and provide consent, which we'll talk about here in a second, to the IRS transferring their tax data to your FAFSA. You'll be able to go through this and look at your specific situation. And if you have questions, you can reach out to our financial aid team and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have on that. The other change is parent invite. So it is going to be a truly separate process this year. So students in the past, you've been able to log in and fill out your section and continue to your parent section almost immediately. This year, students, you'll be able to fill out your section and then you will have to invite your parents to contribute their information on the FAFSA. Parents, you'll automatically receive an email invitation and you'll log in with your FSA ID and you'll be required to complete your section under the FAFSA. It's not considered completed or finished until parents do their part. Students, you'll be able to log into your FAFSA dashboard. It'll be a brand new thing this year to check the status of what your parents have completed. Generally, what you will need is your parents' first and last name, and that's legal names. their birth date, their social security number, and an email address to be able to invite them to contribute to your FAFSA. Aaron had kind of talked about this a little bit, but this is the brand new data direct data exchange. So it is replacing the IRS data retrieval tool. Most people this will work for. So for a majority students and parents, they will be able to go on and they will be asked to provide consent that your tax information is transferred from the IRS. And you have to provide consent regardless if you filed taxes or not, because it's going to transfer whether you did, you didn't, and if you did, it'll transfer all your tax data. The big thing is, like I said, you have to provide consent or you're not eligible for federal aid um, if you do not provide consent on the FAFSA. The other new thing is the provisional independent status. So this is for students that are in foster care, homeless youth, or unaccompanied youth, or students that cannot provide rental data. And this is for situations where it's not just that your parents aren't willing to contribute on the FAFSA or don't want to. This is for more of situations where um, you absolutely cannot get parental information for special circumstances. And we'll talk about dependency and independent status a little bit later. But this provisional independent status will allow you to get a calculated SAI and for George Fox to provide you an estimated financial aid package. We will follow up with any required documentation that maybe we need to confirm this status, but that will be all communicated through your My George Fox. We're going to go ahead and stop here for a minute and answer any questions that are in the Q&A. We'll have about 5 minutes here, and then we'll go ahead and move on to additional sections, and then we'll continue to answer Q&As in the background.
All right. Yeah, we've answered a number of questions already, but go ahead and put any questions you have about the FAFSA form itself that Brennan just talked about, and we'll answer those. One question, Brennan, is if someone they already have an FSA ID, they already created an account last year for the FAFSA, can they use that same account for next year, or do they have to create a new one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can still use that same FSA ID. You might have, and as in the past, you've always had to only have one parent have the FSA ID. The biggest change is depending on that tax filing status and that marital status, a second parent might need that FSA ID.
That's great. Thanks, Brennan. Where would someone go to create an FSA ID?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you would go to studentaid.gov, and if we can, we'll go ahead and put in the Q&A a link directly to the FSA account creation.
We have a couple answers. Questions are being answered here by our chat team. Do parents need to create a new FSA ID?
No, you don't have to create a new one. So if you already have an FSA ID, that will work for the new FAFSA. Like I said, it's only for parents that might have to provide consent. So in particular, if your parents are married and filed separately in 2022, they will both have to have an FSA ID because they both have to provide consent for their tax data to be transferred.
Thanks, Brennan. Here's a great question. So this person has used the IRS data retrieval before and it hasn't worked. So if there's something that doesn't work, can they enter their information in manually?
Yes, you'll be able to enter your data in manually. You still have to provide consent. So no matter if it's going to work for you or not, you have to provide consent. And if it doesn't work, which from what we're being told, it should work for almost all students and parents. But if it doesn't, you should be able to manually enter your tax information.
Yeah, I think the the common situation where the actual transfer won't work would be if your marital status has changed since that tax year. I think that's the biggest issue there. Let's see, other questions here. A couple great questions I think our chat team is going to answer. Uh, Ooh, this is a great question. Will students be able to see the tax information that is transferred over?
No, you won't be able to see, students won't be able to see the data that is transferred from the IRS. It actually is getting transferred directly to schools.
Is interesting. One of the reasons why the FAFSA was delayed, not just for a whole year, but a year and then 3 months for this new FAFSA, is because student aid, or the Department of Education, upgraded all of their security standards to match that of the IRS. That way, they could have this transfer work, which is good. That's a great protection for everybody. What if someone hasn't completed their 2022 taxes by the time they file the FAFSA? Um, what is the IRS transferring at that point?
They will transfer a status that you haven't filed your taxes. And I think we're a little unclear on exactly what that will look like just yet. In the past, you've been able to enter estimated 22 tax data. Um, I We will follow up with you on that one.
All right. Let me ask a couple more before we move on, and keep on asking questions throughout the presentation. We'll answer those. When we get to the end of our presentation today, we'll have a general Q&A for anything that we haven't had a chance to answer yet too. All right, let me see. Oh, this person is, they're going to be traveling over the holidays, and if they want to fill out the FAFSA, what documents should they take with them so they can fill out the FAFSA while they're on traveling on vacation?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're actually going to talk about that a little bit later about what you should have available. But the as long as you're in a situation where the new direct exchange with the IRS should work, you shouldn't need your 1040. Usually, you'll need asset income or asset information, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
All right. I think we'll start talking about the next section here, and we
Yeah.
can always come back to questions later about the FAFSA form itself. So I want to talk now about how they are changing, how they calculate your financial aid eligibility. Before we talk about that, I want to mention a few things that are not changing that we've had questions about or confusion on. One thing, your total Stafford loan amounts offered to you, these are always based off of grade level. Um, because the FAFSA calculations are changing, maybe the need-based portion, which is your subsidized Stafford loan, you might see a change in that. But in general, the total loan amounts are not changing. That is going to be based off of your grade level and total amount you borrowed over your academic career. Also, for our continuing students specifically, your George Fox aid that you received from us, which is like your need grant, your merit scholarship, visit scholarships, or scholarship summit awards, all of that is locked in after your first year here. So none of that's changing just because the FAFSA is changing. You still get the same need grant that you got from us last year and your first year here too. And then finally, dependent independent student status. That's still going to be based off of your actual situation and what's gone on in your life. Nothing has changed about the rules, even though we will provide additional, that provisional independent student status for you and some aid right up front. But the way you qualify for being an independent student has not changed. So what are some of the things that are changing to the way they calculate federal aid? Well, one is your family size. This is something you used to enter in manually, but they, by law, have changed the definition of family size to match that of how you report family size on your taxes. And so it's actually going to pull in your family size based off of your 2022 tax return. One of the ways they changed the rules about this is essentially the student or people who are in your family size must live with the student's parents or live apart because they're going to college, and the parent must contribute more than half of their support. So one way this is changing for some families is if, let's say, grandparents are living in your parents' household, as long as your parents are providing over half their support, they count as in your family for FAFSA purposes. It used to be if they lived on their own, but parents were providing more than half their support, you could count them, but that has changed. They must live with your parents who are providing their support. There is an option to enter it manually if your actual family size is different than the number of individuals claimed on your 2022 tax return. Now, maybe that's because you actually had some family members and household size shift around, or maybe as a parent, you didn't claim everyone who lived there for tax purposes. So there is an option to enter that manually. A big change, and I actually think this is probably the number one question we've had from people when you've provided the survey form to sign up for today, is what are the big changes to the number in college? Well, the FAFSA used to divide the parent contribution number by the number of kids in college. So that expected family contribution number might divide in half about if you had two kids in college. The new student aid index and the way they calculate that no longer factors in the number of students you have in college at one time. Yet they still ask for that on the form. What they are providing, because this is something that's gone away from the FAFSA, is that schools may use what's called professional judgment to make a determination if, specifically, if having multiple kids in college is a financial hardship for your family. And so we've had to create policies and procedures around that and define that. But schools have the option to do that. They are not required to do that. One good thing about how we are approaching that at George Fox is that we will consider that number in college through a professional judgment. Our form for professional judgment will open in January, and we've got the link on the bottom of this screen to our professional judgment webpage. So you can see all the other kinds of situations like job losses or other things that happen that could fall into professional judgment. The way we're going to do this is that we will consider all additional students in college, excluding the GFU student, and then to be considered as a financial hardship, as a parent, your other students' total net cost at those colleges must meet or exceed 10% of your family's adjusted gross income. So this will apply for some people. It may not apply for others. But again, that's how you would think about, do I qualify for this? And we will have that form available in January. We're going to require some documentation to support that, which all professional judgments do. And one of those things would be a financial aid award letter from each sibling school that you're reporting, and the FAFSA submission summary for each student. So that's a new name for something this year, is when you finish completing your FAFSA, you'll be sent a FAFSA submission summary. And so we need a copy of that for each other student attending a different college. And then we will work in calculating things and update your financial aid. I know we'll probably have lots of questions around that, so feel free to ask them and we'll go into more details as we have those. Another big change that we know will impact families is how they consider the net worth of family farms and small businesses. In the past, you did not need to report the net worth of a family farm or a small business as long as you had under 100 employees. Well, they've changed that now. So you will include the net worth of your family farm or small business, even if that's under 100 employees, and that's going to count as an asset. They don't look at the total value of that net worth, but they have a percentage of that that calculates into your student aid index. Now, just to define it, the net worth of your business or your family farm is the value of that business or small farm minus any debts owed against it. So we can help you understand that better. There's actually some specific language, especially for those who have a farm, on what do you count. But what's really important is that if you are reporting a family farm, you exclude the value of the home if you live on that farm. There's probably a lot of good questions we can answer about that, so feel free to ask them. But that's a big change on the FAFSA this year. Another change to how they calculate your aid is the federal Pell Grant eligibility. It used to be that they looked at that expected family contribution number, and that solely determined your Pell Grant for a full-time student. Well, now they will look at the student aid index number, but they also have a separate eligibility determination that's going to be based on your adjusted gross income and the federal poverty guidelines for your family size and state you live in. So this again is why one of the reasons why more people will be receiving Pell Grants this year and more people will be receiving higher Pell Grants this year because they changed the way they calculate this. So they've expanded access to more students. One thing you can do right now is find out, well, will I get the maximum or minimum amount of Pell? You still might get Pell after that based off of the whole FAFSA calculation, but you can find out if you get the max or minimum amount of Pell right now by going to studentaid.gov/aid estimator. This will help you estimate your student aid index as well as your federal Pell Grant eligibility. There are a number of other changes, but we wanted to highlight a few of the more significant ones. One is that military and clergy housing allowances are no longer considered as other untaxed income. That's a really nice benefit to military or ministry families who are receiving a housing allowance of some sort. There's also a way they are changing how you report child support. That used to show up as income for the person receiving the child support. Now it's showing up as an asset for that person. So just a change on how they calculate that. And then finally, there's a number of other income protection allowances and formula changes that happen behind the scenes. Things like how they look at state taxes, other income items you might have, like contributions to retirement that they no longer count in the formula. So there's a number of, on the whole, beneficial changes, which is why we are seeing that over half the people should see a reduced student aid index. The majority should receive that. Again, we've got the link right there. You can go and estimate your federal aid and your student aid index right now at studentaid.gov/aid estimator. So one big question is, should you file a FAFSA this year if you didn't file one last year? And we want to emphatically say, yes, you should. Because so many things are happening behind the scenes with that formula change, you just don't know what you're going to get next year if you didn't get anything last year. So we encourage everyone, this is the year to fill out the FAFSA, see what shows up from that FAFSA process and go from there. Like I said before, a majority of students will see a decreased student aid index number, which means more students should be seeing need-based loans. Those are the better kind that do not accrue interest while you're in school. More students should see student employment offered, and we should see more students receiving and increased Pell Grant amounts. We really want to stress this. I know the FAFSA doesn't open until December, and we have some deadline goals for you, but we want to encourage you to file it as soon as possible because there is still some aid that is first come, first served from limited amounts. And so we want to encourage you, get your FAFSA done, get in line, remind you that it's an easier process this year to complete the FAFSA. So hopefully that reduced barrier will encourage you to go ahead and get that done. So I'm going to invite Brennan back on here, and we'll talk about questions about financial aid eligibility before we go into our final section about what you should be doing right now and answer other questions.
Yeah, we're just waiting for some questions to come in. Let's take a look here. We're just waiting for some questions to come in. It looks like our team in the back has been answering them as they come in as quickly as we're getting them.
I will say while
One
questions are,
one family is wondering if you could touch on small businesses a little bit more.
yeah, so in the past, if you had a business over 100 employees, you had to report the net worth of that business as an asset. There was a question about your investment net worth and your business net worth, and you'd have to report that. Now, if you have under 100 employees, you need to figure out what is the value of this business? What could you sell it for? And then subtract all of the liabilities on that, subtract all the debt owed on it. So figure out what is the net worth of that business, and you'll need to report that as a business net worth. As we've gone through this process, the Department of Education is releasing more and more FAQs and more helpful tools. So we are providing information as we get it. And this is one of those where I think they're going to continue to provide additional information that we can help out with.
Yeah. So, for example, if a small business is one person, like a realtor, um, does do they report that?
They do. Yep. If they are a
Okay.
small business owner, they would report that.
We have a question on here about 529 college savings plans. How are
Yeah.
those reported?
There's a slight change to how they're reporting that. Actually, a beneficial change. In the past, parents, you report any 529 for any of your students as a parent asset. And I'm glad someone asked this question because now, let's say you have multiple kids, you only report the value for the student's FAFSA in that 529. So if you have two kids going to college or and two kids with 529 plans, you're looking at just the George Fox student and what's the value of their 529 for the parent asset.
All right, just reading the question here. So, if a family has a student going to a community college and staying in an apartment due to how far away the college is from the actual home, does that mean the student will not qualify for any federal aid? I'm wondering if they're meaning if they're not counted in the family.
Yeah, that's a good question. So you've got your George Fox student and then another student in the family, a sibling of your George Fox student going to college. They would be included in your family if the only reason they're living apart from you is because they're going to college and you are contributing over 50% of their needs.
Um, let's take a look here. When should students expect to receive their financial aid offer for what kind of grants and loans they'll get?
That's a great question. And I'm actually going to leave the answer for you because I think you cover that next.
Yes. Let's see here. What kind of aid is first come, first serve?
Yes, there's two kinds of aid. One is the FSEOG, the Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. And that's a grant we have for the highest need students. And so that comes from a limited fund. So once it runs out, it's run out. Also, if you are an Oregon resident attending an Oregon college like George Fox, that would be the Oregon Opportunity Grant. So you might qualify for that based off of your student aid index number. But if you don't get your FAFSA in on time, that fund may have run out. And that happens every year. They usually push the deadline back and include more students, but we still have students who fill their FAFSA out later and don't qualify for the grant only because of when they filed the FAFSA. Another important thing, I know, Brennan, you're going to mention donor funded scholarships here in just a minute, but some of those are need based. And so that means you're going to want to have your FAFSA completed so we can determine your need.
I think this will be our last question we'll ask live, and then we'll continue to answer questions in the background. And like Aaron said, we have a final Q&A section. But one person is saying that they have multiple students in college, and it's a significant change to have that no longer factored. They were wondering if you could talk a little bit about what happens with the George Fox aid as a continuing student right now, a little bit more.
Yeah, so the good news, the George Fox aid for a continuing student will not change. So let's say you had two in college last year and you got some George Fox aid based off of that situation. And now next year you only get to count one in college essentially. We're not changing the George Fox aid just because your student aid index number went up. On the flip side, if there's any families who had federal aid because they had two in college, that's where we can use the professional judgment to see, can we look at your situation? Is that a hardship? And can we change your FAFSA information around to reflect your situation, which then may provide additional federal aid?
Like I said, we'll continue to answer some questions in the background, and then we'll have a final Q&A section as well. But we'll go ahead and move on to the next section here, talking about what should you as students be doing now, especially since the FAFSA isn't open. So we'll kind of talk about what that looks like. First, kind of just a timeline. So we talked about the FSA ID. Kind of understanding your situation. If you already have an FSA ID, great. But if an additional parent needs to create one, or if you don't have an FSA ID, we highly encourage you to do that now, because it takes up to 3 days to go through the entire process. You'll create an account. but it has to go through some checks with Social Security and a couple other federal agencies before that is finalized. Now that we're in November, highly encourage you to be applying for scholarships. And we'll get into a little bit more specifics on each of these, but there's the donor funded scholarships, OSAC, as well as external scholarships. We are encouraging all of our students, like Aaron said, the FAFSA will open up sometime in December. The earlier you file it, the better. But we want to have all of our students to get their FAFSA submitted by March 1st. And you can do that at studentaid.gov. We'll send out emails and texts as soon as that opens. And then in March, our plan is to send out financial aid packages sometime in March. So for the FAFSA, we had a question earlier about this. What will you need? First, obviously, you'll need your FSA ID. You've heard that a lot today, but you'll also need asset information. So savings account, stocks, 529 plans, any other college savings programs that you may have, child support received, investment, real estate, business, farm, net worth. You'll need to have those handy when you're filling out the form. Students, to invite your other contributors, you're going to need the contributor's name, date of birth, and social security number, as well as an email address, because it will send that invite to them directly. And then if you have questions on who you need to invite to contribute, the FAFSA application will walk you through that, but you can also reach out to our office, and we're happy to kind of walk you through that. So donor funded scholarships, like I said earlier, is open. So this is open to our returning students as well as our incoming students. Incoming students, you have to submit your enrollment deposit to be eligible for these. But this application is open as of now and will be open until March 1st. The great news this year is there's no essay requirement. We're just going to ask 4 short answer questions. And so it's one application that's going to get you eligible for over 200 scholarships. So highly encourage you to be working on that now. If you're an Oregon resident, OSAC state scholarships is open. And this year, because of the FAFSA delayed, they are extending the deadline to April 1st. So make sure you work on that as well over the next couple months. Lastly, we just wanted to give you some tips on external scholarships and where to start looking, because it is the season to be looking for those external scholarships. So you kind of want to start with existing community relations, local businesses such as like credit unions, community foundation, Rotary Club, Kiwanis. The more local, the better, because the application pool is smaller. The application may not be as rigorous. And it may be easier to follow up with that application because it is a local business or a local organization. We've included a couple databases that are safe to use. So there's national databases like bold.org and collegeboard.org, as well as some regional databases. Oregon Goes to College for Oregon students, and then we also have one for Southwest Washington. That link at the very bottom is our external scholarship page. It has a lot more information and a lot more details about tips and tricks for applying for external scholarships. So I highly encourage you to visit there as well. Lastly, like Aaron said, these slides are going to be shared with you, so you don't have to write all these down, but we have some helpful resources for you, including our FSA ID creation link. We have a FAFSA simplification page. As you can see there, it's the link. We're going to be updating that as we get more information from the Department of Education about any new information or resources that become available for students or families. So keep an eye on that. And then there's a couple other links there. If you're an incoming student, if you haven't gotten your application in yet, there's our admissions application to get that started. But we'll go ahead and invite Aaron back on here, and we'll kind of just, we'll go back and forth and we'll answer some of your questions that you have live here.
Thanks, Brennan. I'm going to advance it to one more slide.